Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Monday, January the 15th, the day of the Texas tundra, where we're getting this big drop in temperatures. So, what a perfect day to talk to our friend Bill Katz, the editor of Urgent Agenda up in New York. He always has a good idea on how to deal with a storm. So, hi, Bill. Welcome.
Welcome to you, Silvio. I'm looking outside. The weather looks miserable, but it really isn't miserable. We don't have a big storm in New York right now. As I think I may have mentioned to you, the people at Duracell and Energizer are in crisis. They can't sell us additional batteries that we don't need. But so far this week, I mean, we hear of all this terrible weather around the country. It really hasn't been terrible here.
Yeah. Well, down here, because we don't get these often, it does throw people into a panic. We did have some ice and a little snow when we woke up today, but thankfully it was a day off for a lot of people, so they didn't have to travel. Otherwise, it would have been a real mess in rush hour today. But it's 22 right now, and it's supposed to drop again to the teens tonight, and then tomorrow afternoon, I guess it'll go up to the 40s, and then the large storm or the big storm of 2024 will be a memory in 24 hours, Bill. That's the way it happens here. We have a storm, everybody freaks out. A couple of days later, it's over. Nobody talks about it anymore, Bill.
Well, that's exactly right. Well, weather reports are a constant subject here in New York because 1 inch of snow can throw the largest city in the United States into chaos because of the traffic situation. And if you get a big rainstorm and a big enough rainstorm, it can even stop the subways. People don't realize that, especially downtown in Manhattan, where the stations are old and the construction is old, the subways can get flooded very easily from the sidewalks above,
Hmm.
and you have a real mess all over the city.
Yeah. How old are some of those subway, not stations, but the subway tunnels? How old are they?
Oh, I think they go back to about 1909.
Really? So it's
That
100
early.
years plus. Yeah.
Yes, the ones downtown around Wall Street, you go into the station, it's claustrophobic. I mean, the
Yeah.
stations are very narrow, and you look into those tunnels and you realize how long ago they were built. It's not a comfortable feeling, and it's not a luxury feeling either.
Right. Well, today, of course, January the 15th, it's Martin Luther King Day, a federal holiday in the United States. We remember Dr. King, who was born on this day in 1928. So that means he would have been 96 had he lived today.
Mhm.
But what amazes me, Bill, is that there's a lot of celebrations. I hear a lot of celebrations. They did cancel the parade today because of the bad weather, but there's a lot of celebrations, and I hear a lot of speakers who all of a sudden uh, say one thing, but then when it's not Martin Luther King's Day, they forget that he once spoke about character, not skin color. Bill.
That's right. He said, "Judge people." That was the "I Have a Dream" speech, and he said, "Someday we will judge people not by the color of the skin, but by the content of their character." Well, that is exactly the opposite of what the civil rights movement has become. Today, it is a movement about the color of your skin, and that's the only important characteristic that counts. And you must be given special privileges. And you even had a situation at the Johns Hopkins Medical School, one of the finest in the world, a few days ago, where their diversity manager put out a list of privileged groups in American society. There was immediate outrage because some of them, I mean, were ridiculous, and that has now been withdrawn. But the teachings of Dr. King, I'm sorry to say, are history. I think the country would have been much better had he been remembered better because he had the right idea.
He absolutely did. I do have a comment I want to make about that letter in Johns Hopkins University. Apparently, the lady who wrote that letter said later on that she didn't mean it the way it came out. Well, how did she mean it
How
then?
did
I
she
mean,
mean it?
yeah.
You
I
know,
mean,
it's
when you write a letter, it's like me writing a letter saying, Bill, I think you are a blank, 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 blank person. And then when you call me on the phone and you say, what is this about? And you go, Bill, I guess I didn't write it correctly. I'm sorry.
yes, yes. Isn't it amazing that the great standard where people say I take full responsibility is also fading away.
Yes,
And I fear for the armed forces because that is the standard in the armed forces of taking responsibility. You're
right.
absolutely right.
Well, she should have said, "Look, I did this. I wrote this incorrectly. It was shameful, and here's my resignation." If she had done
Right.
that, I feel better. But
Yes.
basically, she said, "I want to keep my job, but the next time, I guess I won't. I won't be quite as expressive in how I really feel about this, Bill."
Yes. Well, that whole DEI thing is fading. I wouldn't say it's fading away. It's still very strong. And what some colleges are doing now is simply changing the letters. Because because especially a place like Florida, in which it is now banned by law, they have colleges that are just going to change the letters into something else, and it'll be exactly the same thing, and they will deny that it's the same thing. What
Right.
is amazing is the level of dishonesty, the level where education has been reduced to gimmicks like that, rather than good teaching and good learning.
That's right. Well, here in Texas, the legislature did kill these DEI offices in the public colleges. So we don't have them, but they may come back in some other form. But for the time being, they are not allowed in the public universities. Well, we have a big deal today, Bill. Iowa. Now we'll know the results, I guess, later tonight. I'm not sure it makes that big of a deal, honestly, Bill. I think that unless there's a big surprise that I could always happen, I think that President Trump is going to win tonight. Somebody will come in second and declare victory. And then they'll go to New Hampshire, whoever survives. Trump will win again. Somebody will declare victory in number two. And then we'll get to South Carolina. And I think that's the end of it, Bill.
I
At that
think you're
point, I think at that point, Trump is in and
yes.
everybody needs to just fade away.
I think you're absolutely right. I think he is way ahead. The others have not made much of an impression, which is too bad because there were some good candidates there. But I think this is one of those things. You see Iowa caucuses all over the news networks as if it's the most important election in the history of the world, and you want to know every little detail. I mean, I think one of these days they're going to go through every address in Iowa and bang on doors and ask people for interviews because they're filling time. The news networks simply don't have enough stories, and they're making the Iowa caucuses into something bigger than they are. I also have a question. I hope it's not a rude question, but where was the teaching by doctors that you don't go out in bitter cold weather like that because you can really get hurt? And seriously injured medically. It's like -30 in some parts of Iowa. And these guys are on television saying, well, Joe, it won't stop these Iowans. They're going to be out there going to those caucuses. Well, isn't this the kind of thing that doctors urge you not to do in weather like that? Stay inside, stay warm, watch your health. I mean, apparently that's all forgotten because the news networks need a story.
That's right. Well, if you can go watch a football game like the other night in Kansas City when it was like minus something, 20 below or something, and today they're going to be playing in Buffalo where it's even worse. I guess if they're going to let people go watch games with these kinds of temperatures, then maybe they'll go and vote in the caucus. I just when you look at the record of these caucuses, and I think caucus the plural is not caucuses, right? Uh,
I
because
think
it's
it is.
called it is okay.
I think
But
it is.
anyway, when you remember that Pat Robertson was the winner in 1988, when
Yes.
you remember that Mike Huckabee in 2008, Rick Santorum in 2012, and Ted Cruz in 2016. Bill, help me out. Did any of those guys go on to get the nomination? I don't remember any of them.
I don't think so. It's I think Iowa is a strange egg. I also think it makes me yearn for the days of party bosses. They didn't put people through this. They said this is the guy. We know him well, and he's going to be your next nominee, and that's it.
Right.
And you either went with it or didn't go with it. But all this complication over some caucuses, I absolutely guarantee you in 2 days, the word Iowa will be forgotten. It's a word that comes into the vocabulary once every 4 years.
Right. The only time you'll hear Iowa over the next 90 days is their basketball team. I understand Their college basketball team is pretty good.
Yeah.
They may make it to the finals, but you're right. You're right. Nobody's going to be talking about this because I first of all I think it's too early to have this. We're talking about the election is still so many months away that it is really way too early. They should have it maybe in February or March, just like New Hampshire. New Hampshire used to be a lot later too. But I also think the success of Trump, and I've been a critic of Trump a lot, but I've come to the conclusion that the stars are lining up for him, and it's because he's connected something with the American people. The topics that he talks about connect with people. There may not be, a huge popular majority, but it's enough to win the election, Bill. I really believe he's going to win this election.
Well, I think there's a very, very good chance of it unless something comes along. We can't predict the future. We don't know what's going to happen. Something big or catastrophic can occur. Someone may not make it biologically through the spring. But the way things are today, it you're right. You're right.
I mean, he seems to be lining up. The stars tend to line up for people like they did for Jimmy Carter in '76.
Yes.
Like they did for Obama in 2008. I mean, sometimes you could see it coming and you can just realize that this is going to happen.
Yes. I
And
think that's
and
absolutely true.
yeah, and I really feel that way. Now, of course, it helps, Bill, if your opponent has the approval rates of President Biden. I mean,
Yes.
that helps a lot, doesn't it, Bill?
Yes, that he is now equaling the general class average in reading for eighth graders in the United States, about 33, and he must feel very good about that. But I think that the problem there, and I think those numbers are probably accurate, is that every time they see him on television, they realize that physically this is not somebody you want to put into that office, even if he's already holding it. And I think there is real anger in the country that he's even running at all. Every survey says that the American people don't want either he or Donald Trump to be running for president. It's a very weird situation. I don't recall this ever happening.
No,
But I
I
and
usually
I
it's one, but not both.
Yes, and I think in the case of the president, my own feeling is that this is going to lead to legislation or to understandings between the parties that every candidate will have to undergo a rigorous physical and mental examination simply to be allowed to run, and I have no problem with that.
Yeah. Well, I'll repeat what I've said many times in these conversations that we have, Bill, that I would have been happier if two different people were running. I would have been happier. I was rooting for Governor DeSantis because he was a fresh face, and I think he was talking about the future. And I was hoping he could get to run, let's say, against Governor Newsom, not because I like Newsom, but because I think the country could use a debate between two states that are going in opposite directions of
Yes.
two ideas. And it would be more issue driven campaign than what it'll be now. But I think, DeSantis is out of it as far as I can tell. I will say this, he may end up as vice president. I know that sounds crazy, but it could happen.
Can't,
But
it's not, no, it's not constitutional because both men are legal residents of Florida.
but Trump has a hotel in Texas.
Well, he would have to change it. Yeah, that he's. I think he's had enough gimmicks.
Yes.
One of the things we should bring up is the fact he's in a lot of legal trouble. I think it's an outrage. I think it's so obviously a politically organized hit job. But the fact of the matter is that if the courts uphold, if he's found guilty and the courts uphold it, he's got a big problem.
He does, and that's what concerns a lot of us because, I think you're right. I think much of this is political. But Trump just seems to get a lot of help from his enemies. You now have this lady, Fannie Willis.
Oh yes,
And that's, I mean, Bill, if you're gonna go after the president of the United States, shouldn't you maybe look around and make sure you're not doing something stupid that will come out later, Bill?
Well, I think most intelligent people would think that way, but if you look at the whole history of the charges against him, they're not exactly being brought by legal giants. I mean, here in New York is I mean, you got the district attorney Bragg, and you've got the Trish James, who is the state attorney general, who in this trial that was just held regarding fraud, she attended it every day as an observer. That's not what she's being paid to do, you know? I mean, she was there every day with a big smile on her face because she had pledged when running for Attorney General of New York that she was going to get Trump. And this has not gone down very well. I mean, he some people say, well, this is very bad. He overvalued his assets when he was in business. From what I can see and from what I've heard of experts who have testified, everybody overvalues their assets, and the banks take that into consideration. It's part of the game. Nobody ever gets tried for it except Donald Trump. And
Right.
when you have a state attorney general who is so political, as Trish James is, she was the candidate of is known as the Working People's Party, which is basically a front operation for an old Marxist group. And she goes to the trial every day as an observer. I mean, my goodness, how political can you be?
That's right. And the other thing too is that the what I always found skeptical about this whole fraud case was that the bank and the insurance company that were supposed to be defrauded say they were not. So, I mean, if you're
No.
going to accuse somebody I mean, it's like somebody accuses me of writing a bad check. Okay, but where's the check? Where's the transaction?
Yes.
And they
Well,
cannot find it.
one of my best friends was a banker in New York real estate, and he thinks the whole thing is a farce. He said we always took that into consideration. Anybody who came to us for a loan overvalued the value of their property. That's why we had people who were evaluators who went to the property and corrected it. But nobody ever got prosecuted for it. It was
Right.
part of the game of real estate.
Well, our youngest son, years ago when he was playing Little League ball, the coach on the team, who became a friend of mine as well, was a real estate. He would actually go out. I mean, when a bank was going to give somebody a mortgage loan, they would send him to the property and they would get like an independent
Yes,
valuation of the property. So
that's
if
right.
someone said this property is worth 200,000, let's say, they would say, well, thanks for your opinion, but they wouldn't go off of that. They would go off of this independent
That's right.
valuation.
That's right.
And that's how they would calculate the money. So Trump didn't do anything that nobody else does. And the mere fact that he paid off the loans, that should be, and paid them off on time, as I understand, that should have been enough. But the problem in New York is that I don't know if there's an appeals court that will shoot this down, Bill.
I don't know either, and I look ahead to the next 6 months. What if you have a situation where a man like Trump is obviously the choice of his party and obviously well ahead in the polls to be president of the United States, and some little court somewhere comes along and convicts him? What do you do then? Well, it'll wind up in the Supreme Court. I mean,
Right.
they'll figure out a way to wind up, and then the Supreme Court has got, do you give the American people their choice, or do we let a local prosecutor in some obscure court decide who the next president is?
Right.
I think the Supreme Court, if they're smart, and they are, I think they would immediately make sure the way is clear for the people's choice.
I agree. And then hopefully somewhere in the back room, there's a fellow by the name of Obama
Yeah.
who's calling some of these Democrats saying, guys, you better stop this because they're going to do it to me.
Yes,
And
I think you're right.
because I think when, I was telling a friend the other day that, we've been a republic, I guess technically since Washington came in, but let's say 250 years or whatever. And nobody ever crossed this line before. And
No, that's right.
there was a lot of political passions before.
Oh, yes.
So I think that for some reason there was an understanding between the two parties that if you cross these lines, it would eventually come back to hurt you.
Yes.
And
Well,
so
I think the Republicans are already doing their research.
yes, and all of a sudden, you got somebody knocking on President Obama's door sometime in the future saying, we're from the FBI and we're doing an investigation of those Fast and Furious papers
Yes.
that you didn't turn in. Would you mind if we go in, Mr. President? And by the
Right.
way, can you please tell the First Lady that we may be going through her personal belongings to look for
Yeah.
the papers? I mean, I don't want that to happen. Okay,
No,
just I want to be
then it
I,
turns us into a third world country.
exactly. I don't
And
want it to happen, but when you cross the line, it can happen, Bill.
yes, and you know what's going to happen is somebody in the Republican Party is going to say this turns us into a third world country, and the Democrats are going to say that's a racist remark.
That's
You see?
yeah. No, you're exactly right. Knowing these people, that's all they have. That's all they have. Well, speaking of Texas or the other party, we opened up the Dallas Morning News today, Bill, to a whole page letter from the governor of Illinois
Yeah.
to the governor of Texas saying, "Stop sending people in the middle of winter,"
Yes.
as if
Yes, as if Governor Abbott of Texas is sending them to their doom.
that's
You
right,
know,
right?
I mean, it's just ridiculous. The whole thing. These people. Look, I don't wish them harm. We certainly are not going to let them die in the cold. We don't do that here. But I mean, these people are here illegally. They are taking places in New York where that which also declared itself a sanctuary city. Last week, they took students out of a famous high school for a few days because they didn't have any place else to put the migrants, and they put the migrants in the schools, and the kids were at home. And they said, "Oh, you can learn by television." This is just it's reached those levels, and people are outraged. And I think some of those people who are outraged are also liberal Democrats.
Well, they should be. I mean, and this letter was like, I beg of you to think
Yes,
about the cold weather and these poor people that may have to may have to be outside,
yes.
and as if somehow we had all this room in Texas.
Yes, and if, think about the cold weather as if Chicago doesn't have indoor facilities. I mean, the last time I looked, they had a lot of buildings. They had windows. They had heating systems. Some of them were gymnasiums. Some of them were probably meeting halls for organized crime. I mean, but they had indoor. I went to school in Chicago. We were indoors when we studied, and it is the whole thing is ridiculous because it is so unnecessary. President Biden can clear this up immediately. He doesn't want to clear it up because these eventually are going to be what he feels are going to be Democratic Party voters. And he is obviously, I think, under the thumb of other people in making these decisions. But it's a disgrace that a great nation like this cannot control its borders. And we don't know, and you made this point last week, we don't know who's really in these groups, who's getting into the country,
Right.
but they seem to be coming from a lot of countries that don't seem to border the United States.
They're
Unless
not. I
unless
would.
Lebanon was a neighbor recently.
Yeah, that's right. Unless the planet changed its frontiers here recently. But I was talking to a fellow from San Antonio last week, Bill, and he's always lived in South Texas, and he was telling me that before 50, 60 years ago, that you had people crossing the border. It's a way of life. It happens all the time. But most of them were coming from Mexico, maybe Central America, and they basically came over to work, but there was nothing chaotic about it. They weren't really expecting anything. They just came over to work and then they go back. Or even if they stayed over here, they generally stayed out of trouble. But it were much smaller numbers than what we're talking about here. And it was a lot, it seems there was a lot more, or let me put it this way, there's a lot less chaos than what we're seeing now. I mean,
Yes,
I look at these pictures out of New York, and I'm just saying, my gosh, or this story about the school the other day. I By the way, that school's name is James Madison. I'm
James
surprised they
Madison,
still have that
man who
name.
wrote the Constitution.
Right. Yeah, but I mean, did he have slaves?
I think so.
Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah. But but anyway, crazy thing on my part to say. I mean, people have been, removed for a lot less than that. So
Well, the school is still there, and it's quite a famous school in New York, James Madison High School. It is a special high school, and the kids couldn't go, and they were told to go home and watch on television that the teaching will be done remotely. Well, a lot of them are good students, and they went home and they tried to watch. The teachers never showed up.
right, that's the other part I heard. I
Yes.
wonder if they're going to duck their pay for that.
Oh,
But
God.
but it was I mean, but the whole thing is ridiculous. And Governor Abbott, I don't know if you've noticed this, but he's going to become the demon
Yes,
in this
that's
whole
right. Oh yes.
conversation. Maybe you've heard what's happening in Eagle Pass, where he's
Oh yes.
basically taken over Eagle Pass, or the state has, and now they're threatening him again. But his point is, look, you're not doing your job, so I'm going to do it for you. I don't know if that's going to play out, Bill, but that's a
No.
pretty good argument.
Well, I'm hoping that the administration changes, and that a year from this January 20th. Hey, that's just about
A year
almost a
away, yeah.
year. Yeah, that we will have a new president. But I don't know who it's going to be. I mean, it is quite possible that neither of the two leaders will be on the ticket for entirely different reasons.
Right? No, you're right. Somebody mentioned that to me the other day, and that's a really good possibility. Well, whoever the next president is, Bill, will have to deal with this situation in the Middle East,
Oh
because
yes,
that's a mess. That's a real mess, and we're starting all these daily little, attacks, and we go in and we attack, and this is how you get into big wars, Bill. They start out like that, and that's what
that's right.
worries me.
Well, that's it. We have no strategy. We don't seem to have any policy. We know that Iran is behind these things, and as General Keane has said repeatedly on Fox News, at some point you're going to have to deal with Iran, and you better do it quickly and decisively, because all these little pinpricks, as you say, they build up, and your enemy gets the feeling you're not serious. That we attack, they attack us, we attack a little bit them, and they get the feeling these are big countries, and look how little they're doing to us. Let's do something else. Let's keep
Right.
going, and that's where how, as you said, how wars get started. Wars always get started through weakness.
That's right.
No war ever got started because America was too strong.
No, you're right. You're right, and you just wonder. Now, another thing that puzzles me, Bill, maybe you have an answer for my question. Why is it that it's always American jets and British jets doing the work of NATO? Don't these other countries have planes?
I don't know. I heard one comment last week that it was hilarious. It was a British reporter who was reporting the story and saying that there were a certain number of American planes, and then there were some British Typhoons. The British have a harder job because they have to fly further. That was her report, trying to put down the United States because the British planes had to fly further to get to the Middle East. Well, thank you very much for your compliment and for your appreciation for all we've done. But yes, yeah, they have these other countries that sign on. You've seen these coalitions
Right.
before. They have a whole bunch of countries. The United States supplies the jets. The British supply the jets, and everyone else sends donuts. Yes, you've got to have donuts if you have soldiers. Got to have donuts.
It's the old story. This is sounds like a joke, but it's not a joke. During the Afghanistan war, or one of the phases of the Afghanistan war, a bunch of French soldiers show up in Afghanistan, and the American general says to them, "Hey guys, thanks for coming, but I've already got enough people to protect the airport.
Right. That's
What
right.
I need is some soldiers. Anybody interested in that?"
Yes, and there was also a story like that about German soldiers who showed up, and for the first time, this is a big story. For the first time since World War II, Germany is sending soldiers beyond its borders. A historic moment, and they went to Afghanistan with specific orders not to get involved in the fighting. That was,
I know it's. I mean, to their credit, the Canadians did fight
yes,
in Afghanistan. I think they had 500 Marines. That's all they could send. 500 Marines, and I know from a young man who was in Afghanistan, who was dating one of my nieces like 10 years ago, and he said to me, because one time I met him, he said that he thought the Canadian soldiers were really good, that they were
yeah,
really good soldiers, and they were doing their part, even though it was a small number, but they were doing their part. But they keep talking about, every time I see the president and the spokesman on TV, they talk about this coalition.
yes.
And I keep saying, okay, where are the Canadian jets? Where are the Dutch jets? where are the Finnish? Because they're now part. Finland is now part of the deal.
That's right.
Do they have jets? I mean, it's like
I don't
it's always
know.
American jets doing it.
Yes, look, we pay most of NATO. This is where Donald Trump was absolutely correct. He threatened to get out of NATO, and he said you have to pay your fair share. And toward the end of his administration, people were starting to pay their fair share. But once he was out of the White House, I think that they went right back to just billing the United States. And I fully agree with Trump that we cannot be left to do this alone.
No, we can't. And there is one thing that does worry me, and I understand that Putin was saying something about going into Poland.
Yes, he was.
He was. Now, if that happens, we're in.
Yes, because Poland is a member of NATO.
Yeah, but the problem is, I don't think most Americans understand that.
No, they don't. They don't. NATO is not a big story here.
That's right.
And
Because I've had this conversation with friends, who talk about, and these are smart people. I mean, these are people who you would consider, up to speed on issues. And we were having lunch a few months back, and I said, well, if he goes into Poland, then we're in. And
yes,
they said, well, why is that? Because Poland is part of
part
NATO
of
and we're
NATO.
supposed to defend them. And they go, really? That's what NATO is?
Yes,
Yeah, unfortunately,
they
that's
don't.
what I say.
They,
Unfortunately, that's what it is.
they don't understand it. Look, we're dealing with Iran in the Middle East, and so gently. I mean, I think the next big raid, if we do hit Iran, they're going to really go in toughly and hit their carpet factories.
Right. That's
I
right.
mean, there's not going to be a good rug left in Iran. We're
No.
gonna take out those rugs. You know,
Well, the camels better be careful because we may be, I don't know if they have camels in Iran.
I don't know.
Whatever animals they have, we're going to be really taking out those colonies of whatever animals they have
Yes. Well,
because we're not hitting where we're supposed to hit them. We should take out their army and their navy,
and
like
the
Reagan did.
and their nuclear facilities.
Well, that
That
too.
would be worthwhile.
And
But
we've got the capacity to do it, Bill. It's
sure.
simply a question of ordering the Air Force. We've got, somebody was saying we have enough aircraft carriers and firepower to do it in the region.
Yes. Oh, yes, we do. But Biden has to get Obama's permission because I do have a feeling that Obama is pulling the strings. I really do. These policies are Obama's policies.
I
They never
agree.
succeeded the first time, and they're not going to succeed now.
I agree. But you're right about Iran. Something has to be done about Iran because that is the problem. They're the ones who are behind all of this,
Oh,
and
of course.
unless we deal with them and we keep putting it off. Now, to his credit, they didn't do anything when Trump was president, which would suggest to me that they must have had a pretty strong warning from Trump
Oh,
that he would
absolutely.
take out their navy.
Trump was very strong, and he did not give them billions of dollars. This business of freeing up money for Iran is insane. It's insane. There is something going on in the U.S. government that the press will not investigate. I think it involves Obama and it involves our relationship with Iran, but the press will not tell the American people why we are freeing up billions of dollars that had been seized assets to give to Iran, an enemy nation. And
Right.
I find it outrageous.
Let me bring up something else too, Bill, before I forget. But Brit Hume was on TV. I think he was either last night. Brit Hume with Fox News was on TV being interviewed, and he thought it was a very underreported story. What happened at the White House this weekend when you had all these protesters
Oh,
who
yes.
were breaking not the windows, but I guess they got close to going in. And he was saying that nobody mentioned that. And I was surprised that nobody mentioned it. I mean, I thought we used to call that an insurrection.
Yes, that's right. Yes, they. Oh no, these are not insurrectionists. These are visiting students. And but yes, apparently it was very frightening. They had to move some people from the White House who were stationed at the White House to another location just to ensure their safety. And apparently, the fencing around the White House was damaged. That is very expensive fencing, but nothing was said by the administration. They have something going with Iran that we don't know about. And also a lot of the signs were, well, they were the usual anti-Israel signs, but there were anti-American signs. And then the one that I loved the most was "Hands off Yemen." You
That's
you always know when the communists are involved because the words "hands off" are used. You go all the way back to the 1940s. That is their standard phraseology: hands off Cuba, hands off Yemen, hands off the Philippines, hands off Brooklyn. I mean, as soon as you see that, you know it's the communists, and they're standing there with these signs. No reporter interviewed them. No reporter said, "Why are you here on such a cold night with a sign saying 'Hands off Yemen'?" I mean, it's the reporting is abysmal. It's just second rate stuff, and this is what is supposed to be guiding the nation.
right. No, I know. It makes me wonder if the people who went in the Capitol on January 6th, they made a mistake. They had the wrong flags. What they should have flown is Palestine flags,
Yes, well, the
and
whole
they would
thing
have
is
had no problem.
yes. It's about Palestine. It's about America. Israel is the little Satan. We're the big Satan.
Right,
And now all of a sudden, these people who don't know where Yemen is are putting up signs saying "Hands off Yemen" because we hit a few of their military assets after they attacked ships in the Red Sea. That's where that came from. And
right,
all of a sudden, they're gonna have big meetings in their hometowns in the socialist meeting hall about the independence of Yemen and how important it is to us.
right. Yeah, Yemen is now going to become a critical story that
Absolutely.
we have to somehow hands off Yemen because I didn't know we had hands on Yemen in the first place.
No, no, but hands off is that's the way it begins. The Communist Party is like a prayer group. They have standard prayers, and all of them begin with the words "hands off."
Yes, you're so right. It goes back a long time. If you
Yes,
see hands off, then you're not talking about a detergent. You're
that's
talking about the Communist Party.
that's right. That's right.
Well, Bill, let's see who wins tonight. We'll be talking
Yes.
about that next week, but I have a funny feeling that it will be Trump. And I have a funny feeling that once I find out it's Trump, I'll be switching to the football game.
Well, that's exactly right. Oh, speaking of sports, Brooklyn Dodgers manager you were talking about before we went on the air was Walter Alston.
Walter Alston, who was
Yes.
there a long time,
Oh,
and
many years.
his third base coach was Tommy Lasorda,
Exactly.
who did his duty. He was the third base coach all those years until it was his chance to become a manager. Kind of, I don't know, the old work ethic. You learn the job and then you become manager.
That's right. That's right.
But again, I always use that as an example. I'm glad you reminded me of the name Walter Alston because I couldn't think of it. But I always bring that up as an example because right now here in the Dallas area, they're going nuts. They want to fire the coach of the Cowboys. And I always say, how did the last change of coaches work out? Because they haven't really worked out. We haven't been to the championship game since
No.
1996, and we've had like 6 coaching changes.
Yes.
And I think what the Dodgers understood, you get a good man and you give him good players, and that's the way to do it. So
Right.
I like that
Right.
approach.
Yes,
Now,
I agree. Leave him alone.
leave him alone. Now, the only bad thing they did, of course, they left Brooklyn, but that's another topic.
Well, that's what the original sin.
That's right.
So
Yeah, yeah, that's the original sin. Well, Bill, have a wonderful week, and I look forward to our next chat.
I look forward to it too. And remember, next week we'll be talking about New Hampshire, another phrase that will disappear within one day.
That's right. That's
Right.
right. New Hampshire and Iowa, the two most overrated, at least political stories.
Right.
Beautiful states, but political
Great.
stories overrated. Thank you, Bill. Have a great week.
Same to you, Silvio.
We'll talk to you later. Our good friend, Bill Katz, the editor of Urgent Agenda. I always chat with him once a week and have a good time. Good time doing it. Have a great day, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, and we'll talk to you later. Bye bye, everybody.